Centuries before Columbus landed in Cuba and discovered the Cuban cigar among the many treasures of the island, legend speaks of island natives who would take the raw tobacco leaves, twist, and then smoke them, believing the leaves to possess miraculous medicinal qualities. In addition to the curative aspects of tobacco, the natives also smoked for the sheer pleasure it provided. Although history quickly documents the spread of cigar smoking throughout the Western world, its beginnings are riddled with the myths of sailors, love, sorcery, and even religion, all adding to the aura of its true origin. Despite its mysterious beginnings, smoking tobacco was to become prevalent by the mid-16th century, and tobacco became known for its physical and spiritual pleasures by many. Controversy notwithstanding, nothing would stop the new cigar industry from flourishing. Cultivated in Cuba in the late 16th century, the crops were delivered to Sevilla, Spain, and distributed throughout Europe. The first recorded handmade cigar factory was located in Spain in the late 1500s. Our journey begins in Asturias, Spain, in the year 1916, where a young man by the name of Santiago Torano set out on an adventurous journey to the promise of new opportunities. Leaving his family behind, he arrived in the beautiful tropical island of Cuba. It was there that his life would change forever. Surrounded by warm tropical waters and beautiful landscape, Santiago began to settle his roots. Soon after his arrival in Cuba, he fell in love with the tobacco leaf and quickly became involved in brokering tobacco. Santiago was attracted to the beauty of the tobacco plant, the passion and expertise required to cultivate it, and he particularly enjoyed the final result of all the hard work, smoking a great cigar. A few years after starting his tobacco business, he decided to return to Spain, where he married his sweetheart and journeyed back to the magical islands of possibilities. For Santiago, family was always a vital part of any endeavor, and so, after returning to Cuba with his new bride, he decided to send for his 3 brothers to come and join him in the new family business. Little did he know that his new endeavors would play such a pivotal role in the history of not only the family, but also in the world of tobacco. As the family expanded, so did their influence in the booming tobacco industry on the island. Although the family remained very united, after a few years of working together, the brothers decided it was now time for each of them to venture out and begin their own businesses. Each brother then began to grow tobacco in different areas of the island. Santiago settled in the Vuelta Bajo region of Pinar del Rio. Although they separated their business, they continued to be a very united family, and each brother was involved in tobacco. As they grew, all of Santiago's sons became involved in the family business, and with their involvement, the family transitioned from being brokers of leaf tobacco to being one of the largest, most respected and well-known growers of Cuban tobacco. In 1952, Santiago Torano passed away. At the end of his life, Santiago had the satisfaction of knowing that he had created a great business doing what he enjoyed, and most importantly, that he had passed on his passion for tobacco to his sons. The sons continued expanding the growing business, and by 1956, the family's influence in the tobacco industry had rapidly developed. The Toranos owned and operated 17 tobacco farms and were growing over 1,000 acres of tobacco. In addition to selling tobacco to the many prestigious Cuban cigar factories, the Toranos also sold their tobacco to important American cigar factories located in Tampa and other parts of the United States. Carlos Torano Sr. decided to send his son Carlos Jr. to study in the United States in order to perfect his English and learn about business.
Well, the first time I left Cuba, actually, was in 1956, because the tobacco business that my family was in, we had very important and major customers in Tampa, so that the American market was always very big and very important. So the decision was, when I was 13, to send me to the States to learn how to speak English, so that I could communicate as well as I could with future customers. And so it was the first time that I ever left home. I was 13, never been out of my house, around my family. Went to a boarding school in Palm Beach called Graham Akes, 100 students, 50 boys and 50 girls.
During the summers of 1956 through 1959, Carlos Jr. traveled from Florida to Cuba to visit his family. His time was largely spent on the farms with his friends, who were mostly the children of other tobacco growers on the island. During these years, Carlos Jr. watched and admired the artistry applied by his father throughout the different stages of tobacco growing. He was a young teenager soaking in the knowledge and passion of his father and grandfather. Summer vacation would come to an end, and Carlos would journey to the States to begin another school year, returning to Cuba again for Christmas and New Year's break. It was New Year's Eve, 1958, and along with the promise of a new year came the seeds of change. Change that would not only revolutionize a country, but that would transform the future tobacco industry.
And I remember December 31st in 1958. We went horseback riding. It was midnight. And we were coming from the Plasencia farms into our farm because we were right next door to each other. And as soon as we got back, into the house or into the farmhouse, I mean, everybody was very excited. It was about maybe 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever. The news was that Batista had left. And it was like, something that was not expected to happen that fast. So everybody, no one went to sleep that night. I mean, everybody called everybody. We lived down in San Luis, which was basically probably the most famous town in the Guatemala region. So, everybody got together from all the growers and everybody else just to talk, what is going to happen now. Well, I was 16. I had to come back to the States because I was going to school here. San Luis is about maybe 120 miles from Havana. It took us 6 days to cross from San Luis to the city. The roads were closed for the first 2 or 3 days. After about 3 or 4 days, the road now was open, but you had to cross at least 10 or 12 towns to be able to get from San Luis back to the city. At the entrance of every town, my father had to get down from the car, stand on the hood, and give a political speech. And so 10 minutes, 5 minutes or 10 minutes. We would then cross the town, and in order to get out of the town, he would now have to give another speech on the other side of the town to be able to leave the town. And that trip took us about 7 hours to get back to the city, where it usually takes about an hour and a half. So I remember those days as very impressive, very difficult, because you could see that the whole system was collapsing very fast. And so I left Cuba on January 8th or 9th, not knowing what was going to happen.
The summer of 1959 would be Carlos Jr.'s last trip to the island.
By the time that I came back, my brother-in-law was in prison. My father had been in jail for a couple of days. The situation was a chaotic time. Left Cuba then for the rest of my life. I left Cuba in August 28, 1959, and never came back. I really have lived very, very few days of Fidel. And it's been now 50 years that every day we speak about when and if we're going to go back to Cuba. And so 50 years later, we're still waiting. And it'll probably be another couple of years before we can do that.
Carlos Jr. returned to the States, enrolled in the University of Miami, and began a new life. Only 90 miles from his homeland, the tobacco world and all that was left behind seemed more than a lifetime away. Although Carlos Jr. and many other Cubans fled Cuba in 1959 and 1960, none of them believed their departure would be permanent. Most Cubans believed the abrupt changes were but a brief interval until the political situation could be resolved. Thus, with his family secure outside of Cuba, Carlos Sr. decided to remain on the island and do what he could do to save his business and his country. Hope of a political solution quickly faded as the communists began squashing dissidents, imprisoning any citizen who disagreed with the measures being taken, and implementing the so-called agrarian reforms that nationalized all private property. Carlos's tobacco farm were nationalized at gunpoint in 1960. Although the workers at the farm named La Esperanza fully supported their employer, Carlos Torano Sr. was told by the government that there would be blood on his hands if he did not agree to obey the nationalization decree.